Welcome back to Talking in Spirals. We are so excited. I'm incredibly excited to talk about today's episode about becoming self sustainable. I'm Maria, one of your co hosts.
And I'm Brennan, your other co host. There's only two of us. This podcast is where we talk all things slow living, sustainability, minimalism, all of the things that you love to talk about, but don't have any friends that are interested in.
We're your friends. We're just through your headphones.
We're your best friends.
All right, that's a little uncomfortable.
I am your closest friend. I know everything.
Okay, so today we're talking all about becoming self-sustainable. There's a lot of different things that we're going to be talking about today, but before we get into that hot topic, we're so excited once again to be working with Magic Mind. Thank you for sponsoring this episode. Magic Mind is a mental performance shot. It's filled with a bunch of good things. It's 100% carbon neutral, and we have been doing the 7-day Magic Mind challenge.
Yeah, I like to take a shot of Magic Mind first thing in the morning. Magic Mind is a great addition to your daily routine. It gets you focused, productive, motivated, and that's something I struggle with as a person who has ADHD. It can help you reduce stress. It's got mushroom nootropics and adaptogens and 100% of your daily vitamin C and D per bottle, which is pretty amazing. It also tastes great, like I've mentioned on the show before. If you like passion fruit, that to me is the main flavor. It's a really nice little juice shot to start your day. A lot of these wellness shots on the market right now don't taste great, which I'm sorry, but I'm not going to suffer. I want to taste something delicious in the morning. I like to take it if I go work out first thing in the morning and I don't want to eat beforehand or have a coffee or anything. I'll just take my little shot. And I do feel a lot more focused, and it's nice to feel like I'm doing something good for my body first thing in the morning. They donate 5 cents for each bottle sold to mental health charities that help U.S. homeless communities, and they're 100% carbon neutral, as Maria said, which is pretty amazing. And if you don't like it, they will refund you 100%. You can find it at Sprouts, Central Market, and Erewhon.
We also have a 20% off one-time purchase code or a 40% off your first subscription. So you can use the code SPIRALS20 at checkout or go to magicmind.com/spirals20. We will have it linked in the episode description.
Thank you so much to Magic Mind, and let's get into the episode.
What is your hyperfixation?
Wow, I thought you'd never ask. It's almost like we talk about this at the beginning of every single podcast episode, and yet I am startled by the question every time. And let me tell you why. Because as someone with this brain, I have a lot of hyperfixations. Like so many that I don't even know what to answer sometimes because I don't have time to list them all. And there's been times when we repeat our hyperfixations on the podcast. So if we've done that in the past, no, we didn't. However, I did hone in on one hyperfixation that I think goes hand in hand with today's episode topic. And I think it's definitely something a lot of you can relate to because we are currently in a housing crisis and the cost of living is insane. And it's a big hyperfixation for me because I'm trying to decide where I want to live and what I want to do, and if I can afford to live where I want to live, and what my next steps are in terms of housing, and whether or not I can buy a house in the next couple of years, whether or not I want to continue renting in this incredibly difficult rental market, etc. So that's my hyperfixation right now. And it's constantly at the center of my brain. It's constantly something that I'm thinking about. And if you live in a place that's experiencing a housing crisis, like a lot of you do, or a cost of living crisis, which a lot of you do, then you know how I feel because our generation has pretty much gotten screwed in a lot of ways, but this is a huge one. I've talked about this a lot. I had a goal for myself to own property by the time I was 30, currently 29. It would be a long shot for that to happen where I live in the next,
You got
oh
time.
my gosh. And there's a lot to go into with being a freelancer and
Mm-hmm.
proving income and that sort of thing. So there's a lot to unpack there, but it's something I'm thinking about a lot as a lot of millennial Gen Z people within our age range. I look at Zillow every day and I'm constantly deciding whether or not I want to stay where I live because I can't really afford to put roots down here. So that's my hyperfixation. I guess it's a bit of a sad one, but I just want people to know that if this is something that you're struggling with and you're constantly thinking about, then you are very much not alone. It's really hard out here. And housing, the cost of living, the rental market is insane. I think the average cost for a one bedroom where I live is like 2,600, 2,700 a month. And that's honestly not even that bad compared to a lot of other places. So it varies depending on where you live. I love where I live. I'm happy to pay a little extra to have a very full life and live in a walkable area. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. And it is a constant source of stress for me and pretty much everyone in my community. So that's my hyperfixation. That's just a real honest one. It's not a fun one. But I think it needs to be talked about more. So we don't see content about it all the time. But it's something that's a real I recently had somebody tell me that all I do is talk about money and I need to stop. And to that I say, I would love to not think and talk about money as much as I have to.
Yeah.
You know? I would love to not talk about money.
Yeah.
It would be really nice if we didn't constantly have to be thinking about our next move and our bills and the cost of living. That would be
Mhm.
great. I would love to not talk about this. I'll stop talking about this when it stops impacting every decision that I make in my life and everyone else in my age range that feels the same way that doesn't have a trust fund.
Yep.
So that's when I'll shut up about it. But for now, no, that's my answer.
I say to Quinn all the time that we are really lucky that we found our house and bought our house when we did because we bought when interest rates were 3%. We are insanely grateful. We've been in our house now for 3 years. We got in before they jumped up to the 6 and 7% that they are now. We would not be able to afford our current house at a 6 or 7% interest rate. We just wouldn't. We are lucky enough that our mortgage, taxes, and home insurance comes up to like $1,250 a month for a 1,400 square foot house
Oh my
with a
god.
backyard.
That makes me want to die. There's no world.
We have a lot of other expenses though with that. Like
No, of course. No, no, no. And again, that makes me happy for you. It's just that where I live, that is
it's like unheard of.
never going to happen. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, you weigh your pros and cons, right? Like and this is no, I love you. I could never live in Buffalo. I could never. I would simply pass away.
And that's fair.
Right.
I grew up here though. Like this is all I know.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just the weather. Like I can't do it.
Oh, I couldn't do Florida weather, so there you go.
Right. And there's pros and cons. Like I recognize I don't want it to come across like I'm, you know, complaining, but because I know I'm so privileged, I have everything I could ever need. But
Yeah.
it's a constant source of like stress because I rent and there's just a lot that can go wrong with that. Like
Yeah.
my area is getting heavily gentrified. I'm sure I have been a part of that problem. But they're building a $1 billion development in my neighborhood and 1 billion with a B. And I just don't, the writing is on the wall.
Nuts.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking about and have been for a while. Yeah, I wish I'd bought something sooner. I couldn't have. So I don't even know the point in, harping on that because there's no way I could have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you are lucky to have bought when you did. And obviously, it's not just luck. You had the foresight to do that. And that's incredible. So,
We were also though lucky though that we could live with our parents. And we were living with our parents while we were saving up for a down payment. We didn't have to pay rent. We weren't doing that.
see, that's the thing that no one talks about. Like, that's really good to be transparent about that because there's a lot of factors that come into play that people don't want to share. Whether or not they were given family money. And again, there's no shame in that whatsoever. It's just that, like,
Yeah.
I think living in an area with a high cost of living, I see people buying houses and I don't want to compare myself, but I do end up thinking like, how are they doing this?
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it comes down to generational wealth and privilege, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you can't compare apples to oranges. So
Yeah.
that's something I really struggle with. It's a constant source of stress for me, and it's created a lot of tension in my life in the past couple of years because I live in a high income area. Like I live in like close to Palm Beach. Like I live right by Trump. So
Yeah.
and I mean I don't live right by like I don't live on, the island or anything, but it is something that impacts us living here, us like quote unquote normal people living in a very high income area. Like it's a pretty unique lived experience. And the wealth disparity here really gets to me. There are literally hundreds of billionaires that own houses here while there are people quite literally dying homeless on the street. So that's an issue. That's going to come into play when I decide where I want to live long term because that's tough to see that all the time. That's tough. So
I know we talked a little bit about it in our July episode about financial wellness, but I think it was a really important episode.
and also, there's always going to be people who have things worse off than you or better off. It's like I never want to come across as like, oh, poor me. And and I share my life online and you see that I have a cute house and I clearly live very close to the beach and I have an amazing life. Like, I'm not trying to
Yeah.
complain. I recognize how privileged I am. It's just things like that. I just want to be transparent and
Yeah.
honest about that. So eat the rich.
I will second that.
I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. So now that I've started the episode off with doom and gloom about the housing crisis, I would like to know your hyperfixation, Maria.
I'm gonna bring it back to something a bit more positive. My hyperfixation is sourdough bagels. They are amazing. They are delicious.
That's been a hyperfixation for years.
They are, but I have been making them a lot recently. And so I don't know if you hate sourdough, skip ahead like 4 or 5 minutes. But
The most polarizing thing that we talk about.
I started maintaining my starter in a different way where I
Ooh.
really only carry about a tablespoon of starter into a new jar
What?
every day. So I have these little tiny weck jars. They're like mini tulip jars. And I put a tablespoon ish.
Ah.
Oh, there's your starter. I was wondering what you were pointing at. So my jar is even smaller than that one. It's like half the size of that jar. So I use the very little jars and I put a tablespoon of starter in it and feed it with a tablespoon of water and a tablespoon of flour.
Wow. Okay, I gotta get on this.
Yeah, the jar that I use is half the size of that. So I maintain a very small jar of starter. And I have found that it has made my starter stronger and healthier. Yeah, and I can even skip feeding days. Like I don't have to feed it every day. And I don't know the science behind it. It might just be because it's smaller. Anyways, I don't end up with as much discard as I usually would have. So I've been making sourdough bagels that are not with discard. And they're so good.
Oh, it's with active starter instead of discard.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it with both.
They're fluffier with this active starter. I'm sure they're like puffier.
They are, and I don't have to add instant yeast to
Oh,
them.
I see. So they're 100% natural ferment.
Yes, and they are
Love that.
so good. They are so easy.
I have never tried to make bagels, and that's the correct pronunciation, by the way. Um,
Rude.
if you don't know, Maria is low key Canadian.
The internet hates me every time I say bagels.
I am not gonna lie, it definitely caught me off guard the first time I heard it. I was like, is she rage baiting right now? No, that's just apparently how people talk in New York. So that's
Everyone gets
crazy.
so upset. And I love it too when it's really only just like my region of Western New York. Like, because there are people that comment and are like, I live in New York. This isn't how we pronounce it. And I'm like, okay, but like where in New York? And they're like 2, 3 hours away from me.
Literally trying to fight you on your own.
It's
Oh my
nuts. And
gosh.
I always say like I'm right by the Canadian border. Like that's probably why we pronounce it this way. And every once in a while there'd be people like,
It does sound very
yeah.
Canadian to me. Like a lot of the things you say sometimes I'm like, "Whoa."
And, like, that's a very standard thing. Like, a lot of A's, like, I pronounce like I do bagel, even though
Ah,
bagel,
come on, don't act like you don't know how to say the
bagel,
word bagel.
bagel. No, it's just because like, I have to, like it's, like, unlearning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
It's
get
just,
it.
like, very weird. So,
No, I get it.
like, I don't pronounce most of my A's as bagel. Like, I don't pronounce my A's like that. Most of my A's are pronounced like bagel.
Well, I've never tried to make a bagel, and I should because you make them all the time in your videos, and I'm always like, "Oh, that sounds so good. I
They're
need to
so
make one."
good. So that's my
So,
hyperfixation. I really like sourdough bagels. They're or sourdough bagels, however you want to pronounce it. But they're my new hyperfixation.
we got housing crisis and bagels. I love that combo.
But I guess both of them relate to what we're going to talk about today.
Right. Talk about a broad subject.
I've been looking forward to talking about this episode because I feel like we both have a lot to say. And inevitably, tradwives are going to come out. That's just the way it goes when we talk about this.
Tradwives always come up, and I feel like when we talk about certain subjects, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. I'm always self-conscious about it. I quite literally do not know how to shut up. So that's literally why we started a podcast, because if you know me at all in real life, then you know I talk. I don't know how to not talk. Like the idea of having to be quiet is hell for me. I love talking. I have opinions. I love to share. I love to chat.
And we were having these conversations, like, literally just over Google Meet when we would chat, and we're like, "Why are we not recording this and, like, sharing it with the world?"
Said every bro ever, said every finance bro ever, like, "We should have a podcast, that's us." So, I feel like in a lot of episodes, I, like, just talk over you, and I feel so bad. It's, like, one of my worst qualities, like, I interrupt, I need to work on it. No, I've heard it from, like, a lot of people over the course of my life. I blame ADHD. So, I get a get out of jail free card, but
I always got told that I talk over people and that I talk too much, so
people sometimes it has, like, actually created issues for my relationships where people are like, "You need to stop," and I feel so bad because I don't mean any harm, I really don't, like,
yeah.
it's something I need to work on, so I don't know how to shut up.
And not to open this can of worms, but only women are told that.
Ooh,
I was told that as a young girl. I can't remember another time that somebody
wow.
said that to a boy. Not to open that can of worms.
No, open the can of worms, that's a fact. No, yep, open the can of worms, that's a fact, that's accurate.
Yeah, so talk all you want. I mean, that's why we have a podcast. That's why all of our lovely listeners listen to us because they obviously like what we have to say.
Oh, I don't know why, but I love them, but
So don't conform to those standards.
well,
We
the
are women, we're allowed to talk.
well,
We
the
cannot just go
reason
into the kitchen and stop talking.
oh, that's actually one of my favorite ways to stop talking is go back to where I belong in the kitchen. But the I am a tradwife.
Unhinged. Unhinged already.
Unhinged already. But the reason I was bringing up the fact that I talk a lot is because I want Maria to speak to this more. So you're going to take the reins on this one. And I'm just going to, I want to hear what you have to say because I think that you live self sufficiently to a pretty intense level compared to like the average
I'm
American.
trying to.
So I want to hear, well, you're doing a great job. You know, for anyone who doesn't know, Maria, like, has a like small homestead situation happening that I'm sure is going to continue to grow, and she's only 27 and already like grows all her own food, and she literally has an online shop where you can buy things from her garden, you know.
I do.
So
I sell seeds. I have kind of just like turned our tiny home into a small mini urban homestead, and it has been my passion over the last 3 years since we've owned this house. I live just right outside of the city of Buffalo, so I would say I'm in more of an urban area. I mean, not like a flat out like city.
like how much land do you actually have, do you know?
I have no idea, but
Like less than an acre for sure, right?
oh yeah, definitely. We live in a spot where like it's house, driveway, like 4 feet of grass, and then another house, driveway, 4 feet of grass.
Yeah, you're packed in.
We're packed in, but not like cities where there's no room for driveways or not like not enough grass.
I'm sorry, I'm not gonna waste the last sip, come on.
I understand,
Food
but
waste, baby.
sustainable there. When we first moved in, we had a giant pool that took up most of our backyard. We took it down so I could have space for gardens and so we could have room for a dog to run around. And I've just been turning my house into a little mini homestead. We unfortunately can't have chickens though. So there's a standard that you can't call yourself a homestead without having chickens.
Chickens are the gateway drug
They
because I
are.
hear everyone gets chickens and then they go off the rails.
I want chickens. I
I
would love
know.
to have chickens, but
Don't
I
we
can't
all?
have them. I can't have them in our town. So I have a
Yeah.
homestead without chickens. Sorry.
She grows a lot, and she, as you know, you probably already know if you follow this podcast, Maria and I are both really into cooking from scratch, but she definitely takes the cake when it comes to like she also due to some allergies that you have, like you make almost everything in
Yeah.
your house from scratch. You can watch her homemade kitchen restock videos, you know?
I like to say that I'm
So
an ingredient household
that's pretty awesome.
because, like, most houses would have, like,
Hmm.
snacks or, like, bags of chips or, like, you're
More
hungry, you wanna grab a snack.
processed.
No, our
Yeah.
snacks are, like, apples and carrots and, like, hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah. Honestly, same. Much to my friends' dismay when they come over here. I'm like, I
Yeah.
have apple and peanut butter. A loaf of sourdough.
It is exhausting sometimes though because, like, if you don't have something, then you have to make something, and most of the time instead of doing that.
But I will say that your allergies really influence that. I feel like if you didn't have your food intolerances and stuff, you would definitely have more processed foods in your house. So it's not really just like a choice and a privilege. Like I think a lot of people think it's
Yeah.
a privilege the amount of cooking from scratch that you do, but if they knew
Yeah.
the your list of, foods that you can't eat, then they would understand more.
Yeah, and a lot of my allergies and intolerances are due to preservatives, and if it comes in a plastic bag, it probably has preservatives, so that limits a lot.
Yeah. So she's had to get really good at and also that's just the kind of person that you are. Like when she finds something that
I
that
go
she
hard.
goes all in. So it's like, she can't have preservatives. She's like, "Well, I'm just going to make all the snacks I want from scratch and
Yeah.
like make it my own personality." So I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah.
because we're both crazy. So
But it's helped me be way more self-sustainable.
right. And that's what the episode is about. So, what does it mean to you to be self sustainable? Because I see a huge rise in people trying to be more self sustainable. And I think it's important to speak to some examples of that. Like, homesteading is blowing up right now. There's a ton of people homesteading. And I want to
Yes.
say we need to talk about the political implications of all of this because there is no world wherein you can talk about homesteading as it relates to social media and content and not discuss like the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, the fact that for a lot of people homesteading is a code word dog whistle style phrase for I believe the end times are coming. So
Yes.
and again, we want to be respectful of everyone's backgrounds and beliefs. However, like we both come, I mean, you guys know our political leanings if you listen to this podcast. We've been very vocal about being concerned with the, far right rhetoric that we're seeing in a lot of online spaces that actually overlap with like environmentalism, minimalism, being self-sufficient, etc. That's very concerning to us. We've spoken to that in the past. And we've also spoken to the fact that like there are people doing these sorts of things on both sides of the aisle. So there are
Oh,
people
yeah.
who are homesteading who are left leaning, right leaning, very religious. A lot of the time there's a lot of religious undertones when it comes to like homesteading and being self-sufficient, right?
100%. Insert tradwives.
Insert tradwives always comes back to tradwives and water bottles on this podcast.
Oh, yeah,
We haven't
that's
talked
okay.
about water bottles in a while, but I'll save it for next week.
I do wanna mention that in season 1, we dove into the pipeline, and it was a really fascinating episode. We didn't go into depth or as in depth as we're gonna go today, but it's season 1, episode 2. So if you wanna know more, Tradwives, the slippery slope from slow living to tradwife life, listen to that episode. It's gonna be really helpful.
Yeah, because this concept is pretty unfamiliar to a lot of people if you're not like very inundated with like sociology and psychology. And, that's definitely a hyperfixation of mine. And we try to talk to a lot of like sociological factors that go into play with this sort of stuff on this podcast. But for some people, that just doesn't really,
Yeah.
come into their day to day.
I think too, I have this issue a lot is that whenever I say online that I'm not a trad wife, a lot of people don't know the difference between a traditional role in a household and the online phenomenon of trad wife. So I think we should talk about that.
The political implications. Yes, exactly. So if you're unfamiliar, yeah. So if you're unfamiliar, as we mentioned, there has been a huge rise in online spaces of like homesteading and becoming more self sufficient. And also, it usually coincides with leaning into like tradition. And I personally have a lot of positives to say about tradition, just as many negatives, obviously. However, in online spaces in the last couple of years, it's become very popular. You've seen this phenomenon take place wherein women are using things like homesteading, gardening, making sourdough, growing their own food, raising animals, etc., with being a traditional, submissive, generally very religious, far right, stay at home wife, which kind of all of those words encompass the phenomenon that is the tradwife trend.
Mhm.
And it's definitely worth diving into, but be careful because you will find some really horrific, you know, I don't even want to say it because but just really racist stuff, really obviously sexist, and really, really problematic stuff. It's definitely a pipeline for a reason.
Mhm.
It can start out with women saying that they want to go back to traditional ways. And of course, there is an extent to wherein I subscribe to that. Like, I absolutely love,
Yeah.
I mean, returning to traditional old school way of doing things has like benefited my life so much. We talk about it all the time. As environmentalists, that is so much of what we encourage people to do
Mhm.
is get back to basics. And for a lot of people, that is living how your grandparents lived.
Yeah.
However, if your grandparents lived in the generation and time and place that my grandparents lived, that also comes with a lot of racism and sexism and really problematic views. It's a slippery slope. It's a problem. It's something that is not one size fits all. It's not black and white. It's something that really needs to be broken down. And in a lot of online circles, even saying that you do sourdough or you homestead is kind of like a code word for I am a Christian
Yes.
nationalist.
We're not shitting on the people who live in a relationship where it's more traditional roles in a marriage or a lifestyle. If you're a
No.
stay-at-home mom and you love it, great. I'm so happy for you, and I'm really glad that you are at a financial position where you're able to do that. We have problems with the people who are sharing being a trad wife online and then slip into the videos about how women shouldn't be able to vote, or women's only like goal in life is to be a mom, or you shouldn't have any ambitions to be a woman.
I can't believe we even have to say this.
So there's a
Yeah.
huge difference between if you're traditional, if you conform to a traditional role in your marriage, in your life, and you're happy with it and you're proud of it, I'm so happy for you, and we love that for you.
It comes down to choice and believing that women should have, I don't know, rights.
Yes.
So,
So I think it's really important to really differentiate between traditional wives and trad wives, because we are not shitting on traditional wives who like the role that they have in their marriage and their household. And I think it's really important that we say that up front now.
because people will twist it. People will say,
Always.
this works for me.
Always.
And it's oh, you're a feminist until a woman wants to be a stay-at-home mom.
I
No,
know.
I'm a feminist all the time actually, and I do believe that that encourages women to make choices. The
Yes.
ideology of the far right Christian nationalist trad wife is that of everybody should be doing this. This is the right way to do it. And women literally shouldn't be able to vote. In
Crazy.
some circles of trad wives, that's how far we go. So, yeah, I am a feminist and I'm sorry, but once your right to make decisions for your life starts to infringe on other people's rights,
Mhm.
we have an issue. We have a problem. That's a problem for me, and it should be for a lot of people. So that's where it gets conflicting because people will follow these accounts, these homesteader sourdough tradwife accounts, and they're unaware. This it's happened to me, it's happened to Maria. You'll follow these accounts thinking this is harmless. I like how she makes her bread and she's so pretty and I love her dresses and I love her garden and her kids are so cute, and you're very unaware that sometimes there is actual Christian nationalist, white supremacist propaganda being slipped into this content in a very like under the radar sort of way. And that is why the trad wife thing has gone mainstream because
Yes.
it's not just about staying home for a lot of people. And that's why it's tricky because there are women who want to fill in that role and be more of a stay-at-home wife and mother and homestead and bake their own bread. All of that is fine. It's amazing. I love that for you. The issue comes in when we go beyond that and we get into this very problematic ideology that absolutely is damaging for the vast majority of people. When we start to think this is the only way to live, this is the right way to do things, and we are putting that out on social media for millions of people to see under the guise of a beautiful woman baking bread, yeah, that's a problem. That point, it's no longer just an innocent, politically neutral, morally neutral thing. It's not. And the thing is, a lot of it is strategy. A lot of it is like actual propaganda at a certain point.
Oh yeah.
And we're not going to go down that pipeline because we have a whole episode about that if you're interested. But it is important when we're talking about like things like homesteading, being self sufficient, preparing for disasters has even become political. That's something that needs to be said up
Yes.
front when we talk about this subject, because there's so much nuance and there is so much gray. And I mean, it's gotten to the point where everything has a political implication. So if we talk about like being pro homesteading, pro sourdough, whatever, gardening, all of the above, that could potentially be seen as having a political implication, which is something that we do not subscribe to and we do not
Yes.
advocate for. So, massive disclaimer: women should have rights. Wow, controversial. Wow.
We are allowed to make sourdough, grow our own food, homestead,
Without submitting to your man.
without submitting to your man, without becoming a tradwife or a crazy prepper. We can do all of those things and
Groundbreaking.
not subscribe to the pipeline. So just putting it out there. That's a new thing. I also want to talk about the unrealistic standards that these tradwives on social media are setting.
The Nora Smiths of the world. You can't even say that woman's name without creating a huge mess of controversy because of how polarizing this concept and this topic has gotten. It's
Yes.
wild.
Nora Smith, Ballerina Farm, and there are a lot of now satire accounts that are popping up that are like I don't know if these are on your feed, but they're on mine that are like redoing Nora Smith's videos and
Yeah.
like in
They're
a
honestly, some of them are very funny.
they're
Like,
very funny. I really like them. But I do think that they're highlighting the unrealistic standards that trad wives are setting on social media.
and as always, it usually comes down to wealth and privilege.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't want to talk about it anymore either, okay? I'm tired of hearing about wealth inequality and privilege. I get it. You're like, don't bring it up.
We
I don't
have to
want to
talk
talk
about it
about it,
though.
but it is constantly being pushed and we have to talk about
And
it.
especially when it
Come
comes
on.
to somebody like Ballerina Farm who love the aesthetics of their content. But do you remember, I think it was like last year when somebody pointed out that the stove in their house is a $30,000 stove that they're using?
Yeah, that might not be the actual number, but if you don't know, Ballerina Farm is one of the biggest like trad wife. She's also very Mormon, very LDS,
Yes.
and that's not something that they even talk about very often, which is interesting to me, but now it's become like very widely known. But they have, I think, 8 kids, 9 kids,
Yeah. A lot
and
of kids.
she posts these videos, which again, I love watching
Oh,
them.
me
Like, they're
too.
very well done. Her lifestyle is incredible, but when you're watching these videos, it's like, how is she doing all this? She's creating cooking from scratch. Apparently they run a farm, ballerina farm,
They sell
and
flour, like,
then she's also in beauty pageants and
yeah.
looking incredible. And like, she was in a beauty pageant bikini contest like a couple weeks after giving birth.
Less than
Like,
that. I think it was like 10 days after giving
that's
birth.
insane. Yeah, like, I mean, it's pretty amazing, honestly. The I mean, her marketing is so well done. Like,
Oh, yeah.
and the content is good. It's the same with Nara Smith. Also, there's like some Mormon background with
Yes.
Nora Smith. There's usually some sort of religious aspect with a lot of the women who are promoting homesteading and like cooking from scratch, etc.
Yeah.
There's usually a religious undertone there, as well as a conservative political one.
I would just like to point out that not for us.
No,
We homestead,
no.
but are not pushing religious values. In case that wasn't clear.
Well, that's kind of the whole point of this episode, is that you can be
Yeah.
interested in this stuff. You don't one does not equal the other. You can be interested in things without also, like, again, yeah, keep voting, guys. Vote, please. Make bread, but also vote.
I
Like,
do
God.
also want to talk about how Nara Smith's videos they give the idea to people who do not follow creators like us that cooking from scratch is really hard and that it's
Elitist
a difficult
almost.
thing to do. Elitist.
Right.
Yes, that's the perfect word. And I always go back to how sourdough always seems so unachievable, but
Mhm.
it's actually so easy once you get going. But we have creators like Nara Smith, like Ballerina Farm, that are making these extensive meals and videos about cooking
Right,
from
and it's
scratch
great
and doing it
content.
in an unattainable way.
And it's beautiful content. It's great content. The problem comes in with this with comparison. So, if you're unaware, if you don't follow Nara Smith, Ballerina Farm, any of these people, like, Nara Smith has been incredibly controversial online. And honestly, I don't think she's as deserving of it as people are making it out to be. Like, she's really not promoting traditional stuff outwardly the way that a lot of these accounts are. Like,
Yes.
she really is like, I don't know why people are Okay, so if you're unaware, I should give like an introduction to her account. She's married, she's a model, so she's stunning, so that helps, of course.
Mhm.
And she's married to a model, like quite a famous model. And they're both very well known and they're both beautiful and they're also incredibly young and they have 3 young kids. Like she's 22 and she has 3 kids. And she makes a lot of these cooking from scratch videos. And the thing that is wild to people is like she just had a baby and she's like, let me make cornflakes from scratch for my toddlers. And the content is beautiful, it's incredibly well done. As a content creator, props to that girl and to Ballerina Farm and to a lot of these accounts because
Oh, yeah.
they have found their niche and they have honed in and they're absolutely rage baiting and they're laughing all the way to
Yep.
the bank. You guys need to know that. It's a brand. It's a
Oh,
brand.
yeah.
It's a full-time job. So what's crazy to me about these accounts is that it's and Ballerina Farm is more about this than Nara. I don't think Nara Smith really pulls the tradwife thing that much. I don't know why she's become
No, I just love her cooking from
yeah,
scratch.
I don't know why she's become the of all of the content creators. Again, this is a hyperfixation of mine, so I'm very familiar with far right tradwife creation
Same.
creators.
Those are real hyperfixations this episode.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. Don't even get me started on Reddit. Oh god. Yeah, I'm an incel. Like I'm on Reddit all the time. However, she is not the perfect embodiment of this whole tradwife trend or this like far right religious trend. She's really not. Like she still works. A lot of these women do believe that you shouldn't work outside the home. Like she's a model, so that's not super traditional. And she also like her husband helps a lot in the house. Like a lot of the tradwives are really promoting like
Yep.
the man works a blue collar job and I stay home. And
Yeah.
anyways, again, always
Always.
goes down a rabbit hole of tradwives. Always does. But I think that the issue comes in with the comparison and the content. And this is why we wanted to focus a little bit in this episode about not just
Mhm.
being self sufficient, but the content around self sufficiency in the world of like in online spaces. There's a lot of conversations about homesteading, cooking from scratch, going back to traditional ways. And it's so, I think the level of irony is just lost on so many people because it's like,
Yep.
they are filming this and monetizing this. And as a content creator
Yeah.
ourselves, we know how much work goes into that. We know how much work goes into you making a video talking about how women shouldn't work. It's so ironic. It is so, and I think people just don't see it. And there'll be comments like, oh my gosh, this is amazing that you're promoting this and you're encouraging women to go back to their God given role of staying home and not providing for the family and waiting on their husband to provide. And it's like, she's making more money than her husband.
Yep. And if you notice too on some of those videos, they are just over a minute long on TikTok, which means that they qualify for the creator funds
Yep.
and they're laughing all the way to the bank.
Laughing all the way to the bank. And guess what? They are performing
Mhm.
traditional femininity. It is an act. And this is not for everyone, okay? This is not everyone. However, the vast majority of stay-at-home mothers, the vast majority of actual real life tradwives, not internet tradwives, they are not promoting this
No.
as like an achievable lifestyle. Most of them are living in low income, they're in single income families by default
Mhm.
and they're trying to make ends meet and trying to make this work. And it's not a glamorous lifestyle. You're seeing Nara Smith
Nope.
making freaking cornflakes from scratch in a ball gown when she has a newborn. Like, that is not the reality for most people. So, the conversation can't be had without discussing wealth and privilege as well, like generational wealth. Ballerina Farm, her father in law owns JetBlue, the airline. JetBlue,
Nuts.
and they're really like, they're not sharing that information. And of course you could argue they don't have the obligation to do so. However, in the world of influence, like, people are going to compare themselves as a stay-at-home mom to 8 kids.
Mhm.
They're like, why can't I make everything from scratch? um um do I even need to say it? Like, you can't compare yourself, it's not the same reality. Of course I went
Yeah.
on a rant, I'm so sorry, but
No, you're fine. And I also think that not even wealth, but food deserts, food insecurities,
yes,
it's
time, time.
yeah, it's different for everybody. And I think it's damaging almost to see these internet tradwives portray this perfect, beautiful, slow living life and not disclose anything about what they're dealing with.
And homesteading, like real life homesteading, not Instagram homesteading, it is hard work. It is not glamorous.
It is a lot of work. It is absolutely not glamorous, and I don't even have things like animals.
Yeah, and you can enjoy it and love hard work and like still love it for what it is while also acknowledging
Mhm.
that like I'm not doing this in a ball gown, you know?
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because it has blown up. Like what do you think about the fact that like homesteading and being self-sufficient has turned into such a phenomenon? Like what do you think about that? As someone who does it, you know, and I do it to like a very small extent in terms of like cooking from scratch and everything and
It is very interesting. I think that having it blow up has been both a positive and almost a negative thing because it almost discourages people from thinking that they can't that they can do it. Like, I don't know. I see Nora Smith's homemade cooking from scratch videos and she has like all the different like makes bubble gum. She makes cough drops. She makes like
see, that's what I'm saying though. She's playing into it.
oh yeah, and that's like
Props to her. Like she's making so much money and
oh
she's building a
yeah.
whole career for herself. But like, yeah, nobody is like do like no one's really doing. I mean, the thing is we are, but like for fun, you know.
Yeah, and also, like, it's not typical that, like, I'm making every single ingredient in something from scratch. And I think that when people see Nara Smith's videos where she is, but then see our videos where we're not typically doing every single thing from scratch, it's discouraging because they think that we are, and then they think that they can't because they don't have time, they don't have money, they have too many kids, they have all these different things, all these different factors. So to some degree, I think that all of this blowing up on social media has been negative because it's unachievable and it doesn't seem like it's easy. But I think it's important that you don't have to go all in at once. I started with a very small garden. I started by growing like maybe 20 carrots, some tomatoes, and like lettuce. And that was my first
She
year.
started without a trust fund.
I started without a
She
trust
started with
fund.
no trust fund. No hate to people who have a trust fund. It's just that people don't share what's going on behind the scenes. Like that is expensive.
Yes.
It's expensive to get started.
And you can be a homesteader and have a very small homestead. You don't have to go all in at once. You don't have to be doing all of these different things. I always tell people that if they want to start cooking from scratch or starting to homestead is to do one skill at a time. You see all these content creators who are doing everything, but they've been homesteading for years. They've been doing this for years. So that's not to say that you can't start, that you can't find something simple and small. I started with a garden and then I moved on to composting. Then I added more gardens. Then I started cooking even more from scratch as some of my different issues had popped up. You don't have to be all in. And if you only like one part of homesteading, that's okay.
Right, like online homesteader culture is wild.
It's insane.
Like the expectations that are placed and like half the time and I mean this goes back to our last episode we were talking about like asking yourself what the influences are in your life. Are you doing this? We talked about it last episode.
Yeah.
We talked about it last episode in relation to beauty standards, but it could be true for like just lifestyle in general. Like if you're following a ton of homesteading accounts and all of them are kind of encouraging you need A, B, C, D to in order to consider yourself a part of this community and this movement.
You don't.
Are you actually doing it for yourself or and for your family and to save money and to be self-sufficient, or are you doing it because it's a trend? So it's something to take into account. Like our grandparents did this. This stuff is not new. And a lot of the homesteading accounts will shed light on that and they'll say that. They'll say like, listen, this isn't new. Lots of people have been living like this for a long time. And that's true. However, how much of it at this point is a performance? Because a lot of people get introduced to it via social media. And I mean, we do social media full time. Both of us is our full time job. So, like, we can tell you social media is amazing. It's changed our lives. We love it. It's a force for so much good. It can also, like, lead to so much questioning of reality because you're only seeing a portion of what is actually going on behind the scenes. And that's in relation to everything, not just being self sufficient.
I want to talk about the pipeline a little bit about how this homesteading becomes a prepper, how homesteading can literally lead you to become a prepper, a doomsday prepper, a prepper for shit hitting the fan, is what they like to call online. And I find myself fairly often, every few months, going into a cycle of, oh my God, like if something happened, if I don't know, our government shut down randomly,
Could happen,
I'm
you
not
know?
prepared for any of this. it's very realistic that it could happen. But, like, I'm not prepared for
Right,
this.
and I hate that that's turned into like a political talking point on only one side, because the truth is that, like, being prepared for a disaster, whether it's a hurricane
Mhm.
or anything, or a financial collapse or anything, like, being prepared is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
However, it turns into really serious spirals with a lot of these communities, like, very
And
serious.
fear-mongering too.
Yeah, really conspiratorial thinking, really scary, like, pipelines, like
Yeah, and I find myself feeding into that almost a little bit whenever I'm on the homestead side of TikTok or of Instagram. And it's a very, like, scary place to be at because I don't wanna believe that, like, the government's gonna shut down or that, like, things are gonna happen. But it very well could, and if it did, I'm not prepared at all for that.
yeah,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean? But I don't wanna feed into it, and I don't want to become a full out prepper.
So, we've talked about her on this podcast before, but, Abby Richards, she used to go by Tofology on TikTok and Instagram, and she's a misinformation researcher, and she actually put out a video a couple of months ago all about the ways in which consuming this tradwife homesteading content can end up with you getting a ton more videos that are related to conspiracy theories and doomsday prepping. And the research was startling. I mean, it wasn't like shocking, like we talk about this a lot, we know this. So Abby created some content about the fact that we now have data that shows that interacting with this kind of tradwife homesteading self-sufficiency type content online leads you down an apocalyptic conspiracy rabbit hole, and the algorithm on TikTok, on Instagram, will continue to show you more unhinged content the more you interact with things that you may think are harmless, like a sourdough video. And you should definitely watch her video about it. You should definitely read into it. We'll link everything for you. But it's fascinating to me as somebody who, both of us, Maria and I both, are interested in this subject matter. And we do try to be more self-sufficient, and we do try to make things from scratch, and we do eventually both want to have like some sort of a homestead situation happening. And it's crazy to think that there are political implications to that, but it's something that people need to be made aware of. So we do it for environmental reasons and money saving reasons. It has nothing to do with the conspiracy theories that are being peddled online in these spaces. However, prepping for a disaster shouldn't be political.
Part of me feels like if I feed into it and I start prepping for disasters, that I'm not gonna be able to stop myself from going to the tradwife pipeline. Like, for me, I think that that is like, you know how you said that chickens is, like,
The gateway drug.
it's the gateway drug? I feel like prepping for me personally is gonna be the gateway to tradwife
Well,
living.
it's just a matter of our personalities, like, we go all in. Like, Maria will literally, like, build a bunker in her
Yeah.
yard. She will not just get a couple jugs of water, she'll, like, build a bunker.
And,
So,
like, that's, like, the vulnerable part of me saying it, like,
I don't think her husband would allow her to go down that pipeline.
no,
He's a science teacher.
I have said it before and I will say it again. Every time I start to go down these holes, he is what pulls me back. I always call him my voice of reason because
Aw.
when I start to get pulled down those holes and those conspiracy theories and being like, "Oh my god, like should we start doing this?" He's like, "No."
End of
Just
story. All he
no.
says is, "No."
No. He literally is though my voice of reason and I owe him a lot. He helps deal with different anxieties around prepping and all of that, but it's a slippery slope.
That's a whole other can of worms. Yeah, I
That is
mean,
a whole other can of worms.
we wanted to talk a little bit about the ways in which subscribing to this lifestyle, being self sufficient, can potentially have political implications, environmental implications, and societal implications. So let's break that down. Let's figure out why we do the things we do. Wow, that's what this podcast is becoming, just why we do the things that we do. So As we spend more time online, things just get so layered and they have all these different meanings assigned to them, and it's just really hard to keep
It
track.
really is. I don't know about you. I cook from scratch out of necessity. I grow my own food because it's fun.
And it is nice to be self sufficient.
Yes.
I do want to limit my reliance on large corporations.
Oh,
Absolutely.
always.
And that absolutely does come from a political standpoint for me. It absolutely does. I do want to limit my reliance on giant corporations that harm people and planet. That is what it comes down to for us. That is why we live the way that we live. It's not because of a lot of the reasons that people
And associate
do the
with
things that we do. It's
tradwives.
separate.
We definitely talked a lot about some of the negatives that are associated with homesteading and with becoming self-sustainable, at least in the reference of being online and tradwives. And I think it's important to talk about some of the positives. We do what we do, homesteading, mini urban homesteading, to be more sustainable. I grow my own food for the most part out of necessity. I also have allergies to pesticides. So a lot of times the produce in stores, I have to buy organic and I still have to be cautious with that. So I've been growing my food because now it's a hobby. I mean, I really like it. I do have some sad news though about my pumpkins. I am allergic to the pumpkin greens.
No.
2 days ago, I had a really bad allergic reaction. You can still kind of like see some of it on my wrist here.
The
Um,
black pumpkins?
mhm.
So what are you gonna do?
And this is how I know that my husband loves me. He offered to hand pollinate my pumpkins for me.
Wow. What a trad husband.
I know. He's so good to me. So I grow really fun things just because it's fun. And I started becoming a homestead to be a little bit more self-sustainable, but also because I just really enjoy it. I really enjoy doing things with my hands. It's a break from the screens and the social media.
Yeah, plant a garden, guys. Plant a
I
garden.
love gardening.
That's you everybody should be doing it. I think the moral of this whole episode is that it shouldn't be a politicized thing. It should literally not be that deep.
Yes.
People should be able to contribute and be more self-sufficient and do things to better their households and
Yes.
everything like that purely out of enjoyment and out of logical reasons to do so. My grandparents grew all their own food. I want to do that. It has nothing to do with, a lot of these implications that we already talked about. And everybody should be doing these things for environmental and humanitarian reasons. So,
I think we covered this in depth a lot. If you're fascinated by this subject, go check out our season 1, episode 2 episode. It's a bit shorter, but it also has a lot of really good information in there. Let us know what you thought of this episode. And honestly, like, if you liked this episode, follow our content because we do all of the really fun stuff about being self sustainable.
we will not stop talking about this.
No.
We have tried, and it doesn't work. So, this is going to continue to come up for us.
And we will not be shoving religion down your throat. We promise.
No.
Or traditional
You
values.
do you, but also leave people alone.
Yeah. I had no problems with traditional wives or even really like trad wife content until they push their political implications on people and say that women should only want to have children
Right.
and not vote.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. So be sure to check out our accounts. We do a lot about becoming self sustainable. There's always food videos,
Without the
growing
conspiracy,
videos without the conspiracies. Although you might get a little bit of conspiracy with me because I'm starting to fall into a prepper hole.
please don't fall into the hole. Please. We will continue to monitor you and as we will continue to monitor you and see if you're on the right track. I will keep you in check, please.
It's so hard not to.
So, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Another shout out to our sponsor, Magic Mind. Thank you so much to Magic Mind for sponsoring. It really helps us out a lot when you support the sponsors of this podcast. As we said at the beginning, we have a code and a link. The code is Spirals20, and the link will be in the description if you'd like to try Magic Mind. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
I hated that bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Crushed it. I think that's a good segue into our Closing? You close. You close. I'm done. I've talked way too much. Remember at the beginning of the episode when I said that I was going to let you take the lead?
You're literally fine.
I need a piece of tape for my mouth.